Hi guys, welcome back to the Inside Track. I'm very excited today. My special guest is John Pisano, who's played with everybody from Benny Goodman to Barbra Streisand to Joe Pass to Natalie Cole. The list seems to go on and on. He also brings with him into the studio a very seasoned guitar player, John Chiodini, and a great bass player, Chris Connor. So put your feet up, grab a cup of tea. Let's go meet the guys. Good night. Well, this is David behind the camera.
David, how you doing?
This is John.
John, nice to see you.
This is John Chiodini. This is
James. It's a pleasure.
going to be working with John Pisano. This is James. Let's.
So I have an amp in the car. But
Well, I tell you what. Come through here first of all. Let me show you what we have. John wants to use this, the Polytone 2x10. It's an old one.
yeah.
And I've got an acoustic image set up there. If you like that, or you can bring your own. It's entirely up to you.
Kind of used to what the way they.
Yeah, well then I absolutely think that's what you should do in that case. So James, do you want to come and give John a hand with his amp?
No problem.
You must be Chris.
I am.
I'm Chris too.
This may be the right place.
Yes, do come in.
Finally made it.
Yeah.
I put the wrong address down by one number. I was across the street. The guy is very nice over there.
Are they?
The guy across the street.
Yeah, he is.
He allowed me to park in the.
Oh, you parked in his driveway.
Well, for a period of time until he told me to get out.
Right. I've got this thing rigged up for you. You might like it. It's actually pretty amazing.
Which one is that?
That's an old Polytone 2x10 from like 1974 or something like that. And it's just beautiful. It's, yeah, and I've got you plugged into that guy, so you can put a nice reverb on it if you want.
Okay.
Because the reverbs always go out on those things. Well, we're not short of amps or guitars. I'll tell you that.
Are you a guitar player as well?
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh yeah, he's more famous than we are.
well, that doesn't take much.
Did we get that on camera? John, welcome. It's great to have you here. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. Let's get the party started just a little bit ahead of time. And do you like Pinot Noir?
Yeah. That looks pretty cool.
I think you're going to like this one. This is
All right.
This is Minor Vineyards from Napa Valley. And they make a beautiful Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And it's great to have you.
It's my pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine. So, John, where are you originally from? Did you grow up here in LA?
I'm from New York.
No kidding.
Yes.
Really?
I was born in Staten Island, New York. And I left there when I went into the Air Force, which was in 1951.
Wow.
And at that time...
But you were playing guitar before then in the late 40s?
Yeah, I didn't do very much. I played a lot of Italian sandwich affair weddings, you know, and stuff like that. And just locally around Staten Island.
What inspired you to originally pick up the guitar, though? And did you play as a kid?
Not... Well, I started when I was about 13 or 14. But
why?
Well, there was always music around the house. My dad played, not professionally, but he and his brother. His brother played banjo, and they played all of the standard tunes.
Yeah.
You know, like his tune list was amazing. In My Solitude, and like Duke Ellington tunes and Count Basie tunes, and they played all the real. There were nothing but good tunes in those days. You know.
Right.
And. So I always liked the sound of the guitar. I remember the moment I fell in love with that sound, and it was Sunday was a big day for listening to radio broadcasts. Sunday evening, they had like, I think, the Bob Hope show. It was before the Bob Hope show, I think, but they had there was Dagwood and Blondie. It was a show that it was a comic strip, and they had a show on radio. And in that there was a little introduction with a string quartet and a guitar. And in that introduction, I heard this gorgeous acoustic guitar, and I waited every week just to hear that sound.
Wow.
It knocked me out.
Yeah.
And I always thought it was George Van Epps until I asked George about it, and he says, John, he said, no, it wasn't me. He said, it was one of my students. He said, I actually wrote the music.
Wow. Isn't it funny how we have those pivotal moments? You know what I mean? What's the first song you're going to play today?
Body and Soul.
Written by Johnny Green.
Right.
from Canada, Hamilton, Ontario. But I spent my formative years in Toronto, playing with everyone that came through there. It's a pretty long list because I'm a lifelong sideman. So I played, Freddie Hubbard. I used to play a lot with Joe Pass, Tommy Flanagan, Jimmy Heath, Tootie Heath. Not at the same time. Guys like Lou Donaldson, Eddie Harris.
John, your list of who you've played with is actually, it goes on forever. And I've just got a few names here I'm going to read out. Burt Bacharach, Tony Bennett, Herb Alpert, Natalie Cole, Michael Franks, Diana Krall, Peggy Lee, Julie London, Joe Pass, Frank Sinatra, Barbara Streisand, Billy Bean, Chico Hamilton, Benny Goodman. That is extraordinary. Let's start with Benny Goodman because that was a long time ago.
Well, I played with him. I did several tours. I don't remember when he was. It was maybe 3 or 4 years before he passed away.
Right. So it's his later career.
Yeah, but then I played with him on several. When I was working with Peggy Lee, we did a thing up at the Circle Star Theater up around San Francisco with Benny's big band and Peggy, and that was probably about 10, 12 years before I had another call from him we toured the coast and did a couple of venues, but that was quite a trip,
I can imagine.
Growing up listening to him, and
absolutely.
I can still, there are highlights that I think of in my life, and that was one of them. To listen to somebody and admire, when Charlie Christian was playing, and then suddenly there you are, like
to be that guy
right alongside of him playing.
That's extraordinary. Funnily enough, I'm reading Burt Bacharach's autobiography right now, which is quite an eye opener because I've been a massive fan of his songwriting for years and years and years, but I'm learning a lot about him that clearly you know just as well as I do now. He was an interesting guy. He really took his artists to task in the studio, didn't he? Making them do like umpteen takes. Did you see that when you were playing with him?
He was very specific about. I can't remember how. I think it was through A&M Records. I traveled. I did a little bit of recording with him.
Yeah.
But he was specific about the guitar that he heard me play, and he always asked if I had that instrument.
Right.
And strangely enough, it was one of those early Fender acoustic round hole flat top.
Yeah.
And it was you could take the neck off, and and it had a pleasant tone. It recorded well, but he'd always ask me if I had that guitar.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you meet him?
Well, I think it was through Herb.
Right.
Because he was on the label at the same time.
Right. Well, let's talk about Herb because you spent many years with Herb Alpert, didn't you?
Well, yeah. Now Herb first his first 3. Or perhaps first 4 albums, he didn't have a performing band, and he did those albums with the studio musicians that were available at the time, and the best ones, and then the records were selling so well, the company decided that they should have a performing band. So that's when I came into the picture.
Right.
He called me, and I joined the band, and I was with him from somewhere in mid-60s.
Yeah, my father was a big fan. He had a number of those Tijuana brass records, and I remember we would listen to them on 8-track cassette in the car.
Oh yeah.
So I and that was probably you on those records, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been late 60s.
It could be. That band stayed together until about 1970. It was 65 to 70.
So you did about 5 years.
About 60, yeah, it was lasted 5-year period.
Right.
And then afterwards, 2 or 3 years later, he reorganized and we went and did a European tour. We wound up in England, played for the Queen, and we actually did a big show. I don't know who the sponsor was, but it was on BBC. And the Muppets were on the show too. That was it. It was.
Right. Well, that's probably the Muppet Show.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it was. Well, Herb Alpert and the Muppets. Yeah.
Right. You're actually most known as a rhythm guitar player. I mean, I don't know anybody that plays with that swinging feel like you do. I've got to tell you. I mean, it's a joy. But and of course you're a wonderful soloist too. But it's your accompanying that's really probably kept your career together, isn't it?
In fact, the background.
Yeah. Now, was that a conscious thing for you, or was that just sort of something that happened along the way?
There might have been some reason behind it. I remember because I remember when I was a little boy, and I was about 3 or 4 years old, and I played spoons, and I remember my folks would brag about me, and that people would having dinner, and they'd want me to perform, and the only way I would perform is if I sat under the table. So I can tie into that. Maybe that's the reason I didn't want to be seen, so I always sat in the back.
Yeah. What's the next song you're going to play today?
The other one is another tune called I Remember You.
lot in Boston. In fact, I got to work with Arthur Fiedler and the Pops for a couple of years. It was like a lot of fun. But then I needed to get someplace else. So I went on the road with Maynard Ferguson. I started working, I'm lucky to hook up with Peggy Lee. So I did Peggy for a bit, actually, from like 81 to maybe 88, something like that, off and on with Peggy. I did, after Peggy, like in the early 90s, I hooked up and got to go out with Natalie Cole for a while. So, and in between there, I worked with Hubert Laws and a bunch of nice things. I've been very lucky.
I mean, in your lifetime, you've actually seen many musical changes, haven't you? I mean, stylistically.
Oh, yeah.
And I got to be thinking recently, you were there when bebop started.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie came onto the scene,
Yeah.
what was your initial reaction to what was going on?
Well, of course, they came into the scene. I didn't know anything about them. I was still playing like, trying to play like Django, which
Right.
when I was little, I could play some of those, you know, a couple of lines here and there, and people would say, "Wow, that's amazing," you know. And I remember down the street, there was an apartment building, and there was a guy that his name was Bill Goodall, and he played bass, and he heard me play, and we'd get together, and he played with, I think he played with Stan Kenton, and he said, "Man, you know, you got to lose that stuff, man. You got to start listening to bebop, you know." And he said Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, and I was really impressed with him, and I liked the idea of being on top of something new. And I remember in the old days, this is before your time, the records would come out, like each artist would have a release each month. It would be like a 78, you know. And I went to this record store, and they have, of course, they had a lot of other records laying around. And I found one with Charlie, with Dizzy Gillespie's name on it, and he was playing in the band. He was probably playing fourth trumpet, and I never really heard him play on there. He was playing with some big jazz, you know, a jazz orchestra at the time. And then just so happens that Chuck Wayne. Do you know the name Chuck Wayne?
I know the name, yeah.
Okay, well, Chuck was one of the first bebop guitar players. They were like, you know, I mean that. Actually played with Charlie Parker and Dizzy, and he was at the time. There were nowadays, like, everybody on the block plays the guitar, you know, and I mean, as far as great guitars, there are a lot of great guitar players, you know, but at the time there were a handful on the East Coast, and it was Tal Farlow, and Chuck Wayne, and Jimmy Rainey were with the three heavies, you know, and then there were a lot of guys around that, you know, but those were the guys that were really modern and stretching out a little. And interesting enough, Chuck Wayne lived in Staten Island, and so I took a lesson with him, and I just took one lesson, and then after that, we'd get together all the time, and he really showed me a lot of moves, you know.
Yeah. So speaking of guitar players, you had a long association with Joe Pass, didn't you?
Right. Yeah.
And of course, when I heard that you played for Django, which is probably my all-time favorite jazz guitar record.
Yeah, not you.
I was, my eyes lit up. Of course. How did you meet Joe, and how did that relationship?
Well, I had forgotten. I asked Joe one time, and he said, "Don't you remember?" He said, "You called me to sub for you," because he was at Synanon, you know. Synanon was a recovery place.
Oh, I didn't know.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well, you know, Joe was an
I did know that
for 13 years of his life.
Right.
And he went there and got clean, and so I met him. I heard his records, and I remember I was working with Paige Cavanaugh at the time, so I had other gigs and did traveling with Peggy Lee. And I had him fill in for me with Paige Cavanaugh. You know, we had a regular gig going. And that's how I met him. And then I would go down to Synanon and hang out and play. They had a jam session on Tuesday night or whatever it was. And we would we would get together and play. And that was the beginning.
Right. And you became great friends, didn't you?
Yeah. He was a dear friend of mine. We had some great times together.
Let's talk about Guitar Night. You've been doing this, what, 15, 16 years now? Running Guitar Night?
No, it's going to, September's going to be 19.
Is it really?
19 years.
Goodness me, where does the time go?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember going back in the day to see you at Papillon. So anyway, for anybody that doesn't know what this is, John's been hosting a Guitar Night featuring a different guitar player every Tuesday, whatever the night was. You know? And you've probably played with more guitar players than I know of any other guitar player living today. What was the idea behind it? Did you just have this idea that you wanted to play more, or just play with other guitar players?
I'll tell you how it came about. First of all, the idea was not mine because they used to have a guitar night at Dante's.
Did they?
Yeah, they had, and it was Monday night at Dante's.
Right.
And George Van Epps did the first guitar night, and Bob Bain and Howard Roberts and a lot of guys. And then I played guitar at Guitar Night a lot of times on the Monday.
As a guest?
As a what?
As a guest.
Yeah, as a guest. Yeah. And then, of course, the club folded up for years.
Yeah.
And when we were at Papillon, the manager there, he was looking for some ideas. He said, do you have any ideas? And I said, well, we used to do a guitar night and it was very successful. And he said, that sounds great, let's do it. So we started, and it's been going ever since. And I called George Van Epps to do the opening night.
Did you?
Yeah.
Well, John, I'm so happy you could do this. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. You've done more for the jazz guitar community in LA than anybody that I know, and I salute you for that. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, and it's my pleasure being here. And it was really a pleasure playing with you.
You too.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Cheers.
You're a bebopper.
Well, on the quiet, secretly.
Cheers.
Well, that's it for today. Thanks you guys for watching. Big thanks to John Pisano, John Chiodini and Chris Connor. Special shout out to Minor Wine. And we'll see you again very soon right here on the Inside Track. Thanks you guys.
Hey guys.
Nice. Except for that one wrong note I played.